When the game ends and identity begins. At some point, the noise fades. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It just starts thinning out. The group chats go quiet, the emails slow down, the calendar doesn't feel as crowded anymore. For the first time in a long time, there's space. And space has a way of revealing things you didn't notice when everything was loud. For years, your life has been structured around a schedule that wasn't really yours. Practice nights, tournament weekends, travel days, recovery days. Your weeks weren't measured in hours, they were measured in matches. You didn't just support the journey, you lived inside it. And when that structure loosens, even temporarily, it forces a question most dads never prepare for. Who am I when the gym lights are off? For a long time, the answer felt obvious. You were the driver, the financier, the organizer, the steady presence. You were the one who knew where the backup knee pads were, who remembered which court was playing behind the divider, who packed the cooler, who charged the phone, who sat through the long days without asking for credit. That role gave your days a shape. And when the role quiets down, the silence can feel heavier than expected. Not because you missed the chaos, but because something meaningful has changed. There's a moment many dads experience, usually without warning. It happens on a weekend that's suddenly open. No alarm, no early drive, no packing list taped to the fridge. You wake up, make coffee, and stand there for a second longer than usual. Not lost, just unassigned. The structure that guided you for years isn't dictating the day anymore. That's when it hits. A strange mix of relief and loss. Relief because the pressure eases. Loss because the rhythm you lived inside is quieter now. And that quiet can feel uncomfortable because silence invites reflection. You start realizing how much of your identity had wrapped itself around being useful to the process. Not in a bad way, in a human way. You cared, you committed, you showed up. But now the job is changing again. And change doesn't always announce itself. It just arrives and waits for you to notice. Your kid feels it too. They start talking differently. Less about playing time, less about lineups, more about questions that don't have clean answers. What if this doesn't work out? What if I don't play in college? What if I'm done sooner than I thought? Those questions aren't failure, they're growth. They're the sound of someone trying to understand who they are beyond a uniform. And that requires a different kind of support. Not strategy, not reassurance, not immediate solutions. Presence. You don't rush to fix it. You don't rush to redirect. You sit with them. You let uncertainty exist without trying to erase it. That's hard for dads, because dads are wired to solve, to plan the next move, to eliminate risk, to build a path forward. But some seasons aren't about movement. They're about grounding. There's another shift that happens here, one that doesn't show up on the outside, but changes everything internally. You stop measuring success the same way. Wins still matter. Progress still matters. But they stop being the only indicators. You start noticing different things. How your kid handles disappointment. How they talk about teammates. How they respond when something doesn't go their way. You notice whether they're still enjoying the game or just enduring it. You start paying attention to energy instead of results. And that's when you realize something important. Volleyball was never just about volleyball. It was a training ground, not just for athletic skill, but for resilience, for communication, for self-awareness. And you played a role in that, not by pushing harder, but by staying steady. There's a temptation in this phase to look backward, to replay decisions. Should we have joined that club? Should we have skipped that season? Should we have pushed more? Should we have pulled back sooner? Those questions are natural, but they don't lead anywhere useful, because hindsight always feels cleaner than reality. You made the best decisions you could with the information you had at the time. That matters. What matters more is what you do now. Because even when volleyball ends, the relationship continues. And how you handle transition sets the tone for everything that follows. College, careers, relationships, life decisions. Your kid will remember how you handled the in-between moments, how you responded when the path wasn't clear, whether you allowed them to change without making it feel like failure, whether you respected their evolving identity. That's the long game, and it requires something different from dads. It requires restraint, trust, confidence in the foundation you already built. You don't need to direct as much anymore. You support from the side, not absent, just not controlling. That balance is delicate, but when you get it right, something powerful happens. The relationship deepens. Conversations become more honest. Pressure loses its grip, and volleyball finds its rightful place as a chapter, not the whole story. Some dads worry that if they stop pushing, everything will fall apart, that momentum will disappear, that opportunity will slip away. But here's the truth most systems won't tell you. Real growth doesn't vanish when pressure eases. It reveals itself. Kids who love the game keep playing. Kids who need space find clarity. Either way, they grow. And you get to walk alongside that growth instead of steering it. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. You've already done the hardest part. You showed up consistently. You absorbed stress quietly. You made sacrifices without needing recognition. Now the work is quieter, but it's no less important. It's about trust, about letting go without disconnecting, about understanding that your role evolved for a reason. And if you're honest, part of you is ready for that evolution too, because you're more than a schedule, more than a driver, more than a sideline presence. You're a father, and that role doesn't end when the whistles stop. It just changes shape. The dads who struggle most in this phase aren't the ones who care too much. They're the ones who don't know how to release control without losing connection. That takes practice. It takes awareness. It takes the humility to accept that your kid's journey doesn't need to mirror your expectations. And that's not a loss. That's growth. There's a quiet strength in being the dad who doesn't panic during transition, who doesn't rush to replace one structure with another, who allows space without withdrawing support. That presence becomes an anchor, not just during sports, but later, when life gets complicated, when choices aren't clear, when pressure shows up in new forms. Your kid learns something powerful just by watching you navigate this phase. They learn that identity isn't fixed, that worth isn't tied to performance, that love doesn't disappear when outcomes change. Those lessons last longer than any trophy, longer than any highlight, longer than any recruiting timeline. And one day, when volleyball is just a memory, those lessons remain in how they approach challenges, in how they treat others, in how they define success for themselves. That's the return most people never calculate because it doesn't show up immediately. It unfolds over years, quietly, just like the role you played. This is the part of the journey that doesn't get talked about enough. The part where dads step back without stepping away, where support becomes less visible but more meaningful, where presence matters more than pressure. This is Volleyball Dad Diaries, and this part of the journey deserves just as much attention as anything that happened on the court.
It's the rapper, baby!